They were the elite, the special forces of medieval Japan, ruled by an ancient code.
The way of the samurai is death. They have no other skill to sell except their ability to kill people. They are obsessed with death.
At the heart of their world is the deadliest blade ever made.
When you pick up a Japanese sword, it actually feels, it's almost alive.
Their mission? Protect the honor of their clan. There is no alternative.
Absolutely impossible not to take revenge. Absolutely impossible.
The 47 Ronin were doing exactly what they had to do.
This is the true story of the 47 Ronin, an epic tale of revenge in ancient Japan, the last and the greatest of the samurai black ops. It's 1703. The city of Edo in Japan is a teeming metropolis. It's the capital of a major Eastern power and the headquarters of a military dictatorship. In one of its smarter suburbs, a top government official has been enjoying a party for the cream of Edo society. Lord Kira Yoshinaka has served the Shogun, Japan's absolute ruler, all his life. He's an influential bureaucrat, and he's cleverly ensured that he and his family enjoy the protection of his master.
Kira is an older man. He is a hatamoto, a high-ranking knight, we would say. He's married well, and his daughter has married extremely well, and he's well connected.
He lives by the rules of conformity and has made his name with the court's philosophy of obedience and fitting in.
If you know your place and you perform in the place you are supposed to perform, the world will be a harmonious place. Everything will work. Everyone should be linked in this very powerful, strong hierarchy. Everyone must do what they're told.
But to get to the top, he's made many formidable enemies. One group has been worrying him for some time. But tonight, Kira is letting himself relax a little. He's had some encouraging intelligence. The group seems to have disbanded. It turns out to be a fatal mistake. Because what he doesn't know is that 47 samurai commandos are closing in on his mansion. And they have one objective: to find and kill him. In the utmost secrecy, a band of outlaws has resurrected a near-forgotten way of war. Now they're hell-bent on wreaking terrible revenge.
When they turned up in Edo, it was a massive shock. And they were using all the weapons. Sword, spear, bow, everything. And they knew how to use them.
And so far, Lord Kira and his household are completely unaware of the danger they're in. They are about to come face to face with a force who will become one of Japan's greatest legends, the 47 Ronin. Just a few years earlier, the possibility of a violent attack on a senior politician in Japan's ancient court would have been unthinkable. The court life of Edo in 1701 is extremely refined. Politeness and correct behavior is everything. It might be a military dictatorship, but this is no place for the straightforward soldier type. It's a world that's the ultimate in perfect manners, artistic beauty, and highly polished courtly etiquette.
Everything is so rigidly defined. The wrong shoelaces will get you into trouble. Everyone titters behind their hands because you're wearing green on a Sunday. There's all these kind of rules that no one bothers to explain.
Into this delicate world comes a high-born prince with a serious attitude problem. As a noble, Asano Naganori is obliged by law to spend 6 months a year at the court of the Shogun to show his loyalty. He has to fit in, keep his emotions under control, and play the game. The trouble is, he's just not cut out for the job.
Fantasy, myths, ancient beginnings. Elevate your historical exploration to unparalleled heights with a History Hits subscription. Don't miss out on our latest releases, where classicist Natalie Haynes travels to Corfu to unravel the story of the Gorgon Medusa, one of the most iconic yet misconstrued figures of Greek mythology. Join Jasmine Elmer as she dives into something that people have been obsessed with throughout history: dragons. Where did they come from? What exactly is a dragon? Finally, Dan Snow explores the ancient history of the Isles of Scilly and discovers burial grounds built thousands of years ago. Discover hundreds of hours of award-winning documentaries and ad-free podcasts with History Hit. Sign up for a special offer via the link in the description.
You have these very intricate rituals going on, and Kira is there explaining to people, you need to move that to there, then, you must wait, you must nod, you must bow, you must walk backwards. No, not now, then. Everything is incredibly delicate and intricate. One wrong move, everyone's going to laugh.
Asano's country seat is far, far away from the refined airs of Edo. He's a man of the countryside and the highlands, and his people are not city types. Above all, he's from a special class in Japan, one that defines the nation's military pride and tradition more than any other. Asano is a samurai.
Samurai were essentially a hereditary warrior class that was best known for ruling Japan for about 600 or 700 years until they were eliminated in the wake of modernization of the late 19th century. They're identified by hairstyles. They're carrying 2 swords. So their dress definitely sets them apart.
By the time Asano arrives at court, Japan has been at peace for 100 years. It's been a long time since anyone saw real conflict. But the samurai are still special, and everyone at the Edo court is all too aware of their fierce military traditions, Asano included.
The way of the samurai is death. And that was the way to face battle, to say that you've got no ties to this world, you're just going in to kill people. They have no other skill to sell except their ability to kill people. And so that becomes like a death cult to them. They are obsessed with death.
Above all, the samurai are fearless. The height of excellence for any warrior is bravery, and the samurai take it to extremes.
Being a samurai is about mastering your body, your emotions, your skills, and then perfection them to the point that it is that full mastery that determines your ability to perform in battle.
But in Japan of 1700, the samurai like Asano have a problem. They are an elite class of expert soldiers in a country that has abolished war. There is quite simply nothing for people like Asano to do.
The Shogun had issued a decree saying there will be no more wars, stop spending money on castles, when there's no fighting to be done. And in fact, in 1703, it's exactly 100 years after the last real battle of the samurai. Everyone's sitting around. It's the great-grandchildren of the original samurai victors, and they're arguing about how a samurai should behave. And nobody really knows.
The samurai or bushi of the 18th century may never have seen actual warfare, but they still have all the pride you'd expect from a group backed by a 1,000-year-old military tradition. And in Asano's country estate, the way of the samurai, or bushi, meant perfecting your horsemanship and keeping your fighting skills up.
The courtiers in the Shogun's palace, they were all samurai, bushi. They'd kept their fighting skills alive in the 100 years of peace, but they weren't what the country samurai were. They were so much stronger than the ones that had been weakened by years of court life.
The Edo court is a world away from Asano's country estate, and he simply doesn't fit in there. But it's not because he's a country gentleman. He's also got a wild streak.
Asano's a problem. Asano's a problem child. And there's a kind of shogunal report. And it didn't say anything negative about Asano, but it did say he was fond of drink. And it did say he liked the ladies. And it kind of implied that he was a bit of a wastrel and not real kind of high-rank material.
The shogun requires Asano to carry out certain official duties. But the prince doesn't have much of an idea of the correct courtly procedures. So the shogun appoints the bureaucrat Lord Kira to show him how to behave properly at court. Kira is the ultimate insider, and Asano is a complete outsider. It's a disaster waiting to happen.
Kira doesn't have any real power. The only power he can exercise is being snide with people. And luckily for him, there's plenty of opportunity because he's in charge of explaining to these country bumpkins who've come out of nowhere how they're supposed to act in the Shogun's palace.
And Kira makes a point of showing his pupil just how much he has to learn. He rubs Asano's pride in the dirt and delights in showing him up during long, tedious lessons on correct behavior. Two personalities are immediately on a collision course that will have devastating consequences. Before long, Kira's insulting attitude towards his pupil pushes Asano to the limits of his endurance.
He was really treated as a country bumpkin. And in the end, he was so insulted that he just couldn't take any more. He just drew his sword and slashed at Kira.
Kira!
Of course, that was absolutely forbidden. It would be like drawing your gun in Buckingham Palace. You just don't.
Asano's attack on Lord Kira is a shocking event. And the whole of Edo society is stunned. No one has ever done anything like it before in the Shogun's palace.
It would have been bad enough if he'd just drawn his sword. But to actually wound a minister of the government was unforgivable, really.
Asano has crossed the line. It doesn't take the Shogun long to decide what to do with this troublesome young prince.
The only thing really that they could do as a punishment was to order Asano to commit suicide.
The decision from the Shogun is unequivocal. Asano has to die, preferably as soon as possible. As a samurai, he's allowed a unique form of execution. The honorable way for Asano to accept his fate is to die by his own hand. But it has to be done in a very specific way, laid down by law and tradition. It requires exceptional bravery to carry out. It's called seppuku.
Seppuku means cutting the belly, and it is an incredibly painful way to die. It is, as far as a samurai could work out, the most painful way to die. It'll take you 2 or 3 days to slowly bleed to death. You'll be in agony. And that's why they did it, because anyone can stab themselves in the throat, anyone can jump off a cliff. That's what the civilians would do. But a samurai has to take the boldest option.
Seppuku originated in the heat of samurai warfare. Cutting your own throat or disemboweling yourself was a way of showing that you were not afraid of a painful death. It was the ultimate defiance. If you knew, you were being defeated.
While battle is raging around them, the castle is on fire, if they were being defeated, they would simply accept their fate, take out a knife, and they would open up their bellies. This would let them bleed out and die. But it was done by their own hand. This was saying to the enemy, I am still a warrior. You will never take me. I have my honor.
Long after the last samurai battle, however, seppuku survives as a method of execution. A condemned samurai warrior who wants to die honorably is allowed to cut his belly. Hours after his attack on Kira, this is now what Asano must prepare himself for.
If you imagine actually stabbing yourself in the stomach and cutting right across, the pain would be incredible. It would take incredible willpower to do that.
Just 6 hours after his fateful attack on Kira, Asano is facing the traditional end of the samurai warrior. The procedure is carried out according to formal and precise rules. From the way Asano dresses, to the distance that observers must stand from him.
In front of him, there would be an examiner. This examiner would watch him, but you would have to be over 3.5 meters away. The reason they did this is because sometimes a samurai decided at the last minute he wasn't going to kill himself and he was going to fight his way out. So he'd try and reach forward and grab the blade of the examiner and pull it out and fight. So then they'd put a short sword in front of him on a tray.
The rules of seppuku stipulate that next to Asano, a second stands by. With the sword presented and ritually cleansed, he now has to ensure that the execution goes according to plan.
The second's job is to watch this man intently. If he thinks this man is going to fight his way out, he will crouch down at the rear waiting. If he thinks that the man's okay and he's calm and he's going to commit seppuku correctly, he will get ready with the sword. The man then will plunge the dagger into his stomach and he'll draw it across. Sometimes they'll do multiple cuts to show their bravery. It's at this point that the second comes down, cuts the head off. Absolutely essentially gets the head in one blow to keep his own honor.
Asano may be dead, but the consequences reverberate far and wide. His country seat is at Akko, 400 miles away. It's a grand castle and substantial estate with hundreds of loyal samurai who have served Asano's family for generations. As the terrible news of Asano's crime, disgrace, and death is read out, the truth starts to sink in.
They knew what was going to happen, that the castle would be taken and the lands taken. They would have no work, they'd have no leader, so their lives would be destroyed.
Nearly 400 samurai, formerly under Asano's command, now have nowhere to go. They've lost their jobs and face a dramatic drop in status. The term for a leaderless samurai is a Ronin, or a drifter.
If you're a samurai and you lose your job, there's no labor exchange. No one's hiring. No one wants a samurai from a failed domain. You become cast adrift. You're flotsam and jetsam. You are Ronin. You are a wave man. You probably only had one sellable skill, which was the ability to beat people up and kill people.
Losing your master is about the worst possible thing that can happen to a samurai. And many never recover from the catastrophic loss of status.
They would really become itinerant mercenary soldiers. So they were looked on as troublemakers. The Ronin in Edo, which is Tokyo now, caused a lot of trouble. You know, they're fighting and brawling and probably drinking.
Asano may have left no heirs, but there are people who are loyal to him. And one in particular is an important family servant called Oishi Yoshio. He's a faithful guardian who's known Asano since childhood.
Oishi was probably responsible for the education of Asano. Asano is, in modern parlances, child of a broken home. His father dies when he's 8 or 9 years old. He's raised by the samurai. When Asano misbehaves, when he causes this trouble, I'm sure Oishi thinks this is my fault. I have to deal with this in some way.
With nowhere to turn, the Ronin make Oishi their leader. They're cornered, and they want action. They want Oishi to come up with a plan. As well as losing their jobs, they're outraged because they think the execution was unfair. In particular, they're angry that Kira has not been arrested. In their eyes, Asano's death has all the hallmarks of an illegal killing. It's as if their master has been murdered. And for a samurai, that means only one thing.
A samurai who does not take revenge is not a true samurai. He would be laughed upon. So what happens is, if a member of your family, usually a higher ranking member, is killed, it is your duty, if not the law, that you have to go and kill his murderer. So sometimes samurai could not even inherit their lands unless they avenged the death of their father. This could lead to years tracking down the murderer until you killed him. And when you did, you'd bring the head home in proof that you had committed revenge.
The Ronin now demand a death or glory revenge attack immediately, even if it's suicidally dangerous. But Oishi knows that that is exactly what Kira and the Shogun are expecting. So he counsels caution. He wants the Ronin to put their faith in the Shogun's justice.
Oishi is actually one of the pacifists. He's a dove. He says, well, we better do what we're told. There's a bunch of other samurai from our course saying, no, let's seize the castle. Let's start a siege. Let's start a fight. Let's attack Kira right now. Oishi is the one who goes, no, we must obey the Shogun. We must do what's right.
Although outwardly calm, Oishi is just as outraged as the Ronin. But he wants justice more than revenge. He hopes Kira will be punished. That, at least, would mean some kind of fairness. And then comes the news Oishi had not been expecting. Kira is to be completely exonerated.
It's only when Kira gets away with it, and when it's clear that there's no hope for them, that this vendetta officially begins.
Their fates are now sealed. And for Oishi, there can be only one course of action.
There was only one thing they could do. Absolutely impossible not to take revenge. Absolutely impossible.
Oishi wants revenge, but he knows the full frontal assault favored by the young Ronin will be no more than a gesture. He wants Kira dead, and his vision depends on organization and stealth. If it works, it will be a proper samurai revenge. But it will also be an awesomely difficult task. Kira always travels with a large force of bodyguards. The only way of hitting him will be at home. But that is heavily defended, and it's in a high-security district surrounded by government buildings. Not just that, the attack will have to be coordinated from their base 400 miles away. It's already starting to look like an impossible job. To make matters worse, Kira's agents track Oishi's every move, while Kira anxiously waits to see what he and his Ronin will do next. Will they launch a symbolic attack, or accept their downfall and live out their days as despised Ronin? Oishi decides to play a long game and wait. And while he waits, he's going to act out an elaborate deception.
His plan was to show the government that they weren't going to take revenge, which was very difficult because at that time, Japan was a police state. The Shogun's government had spies everywhere, there were secret police everywhere, and whatever Yaku Ronin did would have been reported immediately back to the Shogun. They would have known, and they would have been arrested immediately.
To throw Kira and the Shogun's spies off the scent, Oishi pretends to do what Kira had hoped he would, and he gives up. He even pretends to let his life slide and goes to geisha houses, where he gets drunk.
So the Ronin under Oishi started drinking and sort of dissolute life, which was clever, very clever, because they weren't those kind of people to start with. Complete change of character.
And sure enough, Kira's spies report faithfully that Oishi appears to be a broken man. Gradually, Kira and his agents come to believe that Oishi is finished, and his men have dispersed. With Kira's suspicions allayed, Oishi has another problem: how to physically get his men from Akko to the capital without being seen. It seems an almost impossible task. So, in a classic maneuver of Special Forces deception, he instructs his men to go undercover and live ordinary lives as sleepers.
They all disappeared. They scattered to the winds, secretly.
More than 2 years pass, and gradually, the court at Edo forgets the dreadful business of Asano Naganori. As the winter of 1703 closes in, and the nights darken, Oishi senses that his plan is ready. The word goes out to the scattered sleeper units to make their way to Edo in secret. It's time to kill Kira. As if on the eve of a mighty battle, each man dresses with the meticulous care and ritual precision of a samurai going into battle for his lord. And at the heart of the Ronin's preparations is the sword. A weapon of devastating ferocity, and samurai are the only class in Japanese society allowed to carry them. Over centuries of development, the sword of the samurai, or bushi, has become sharpened to a pinnacle of perfection unmatched anywhere.
The Japanese sword is one of the wonders of the world. It's the best metalwork that has ever been made at any time in history, anywhere. The Japanese sword is the life of the bushi. That was his status, his culture, and his life, and his power. Because throughout Japanese history, the bushi and the sword has had complete control over the country.
Using techniques unknown outside Japan, swordsmiths combine razor sharpness with near indestructible toughness. They take the concept of the sword to another level.
Swords are designed to be made out of composite ingots of steel. So you have very hard steel for the edge, softer iron for the core, and medium hard steel for the sides and the back. And those different ingots of iron are all fused together, then hammered out into the whole blade, so that you get this artificially made composite steel structure.
The curved shape of the samurai sword ensures every blow automatically incorporates a slicing action that dramatically ramps up its destructive power. It's a wonder of the samurai's world, a unique part of his armory, and central to who he is.
When you pick up a Japanese sword, you can actually feel it. It's not just a piece of metal. It actually feels, it's almost alive. And you can feel the energy that's gone into making it, the skill, the design, the shape. The sword is a weapon. It's an absolutely lethal weapon, but it's a masterpiece of technology and art.
But it's not just the technology that makes the sword such a powerful part of the samurai identity. Caring for it and ensuring its optimum effectiveness through constant sharpening and polishing is central to samurai training. It isn't so much a weapon as a way of martial life.
Japanese swords required a certain degree of care in order to remain particularly sharp. Polishing your sword or keeping it always very sharp is very similar to the type of physical and mental training that as a samurai you have to go through in order to achieve the stillness of the mind and the maximum strength of your body.
But Oishi knows that even the finest sword will not protect his men against the forces of the state at Edo. He's going to need the biggest armory he can muster. And for that, he digs deep into the past of the samurai battle.
In the nitty-gritty of battle, they were far more likely to use spears, bows and arrows, axes, anything that came to hand.
The Ronin go back to their roots and adopt long-forgotten techniques and weaponry of the medieval battlefield.
They were behaving in an incredibly practical way, and they were behaving like real samurai, like people in the Middle Ages would have behaved. They were armed with odd weapons. They had spears, clubs. They had axes to smash down doors. They were incredibly practical tools.
As well as weapons, the Ronin are going to need something else if they're to prevail in a full-scale assault. Traditional armor is world-class, combining lightness and flexibility with the capacity to take anything the battle can throw at it. If they can get hold of any, Oishi and his men will be well served by the armor of their grandfathers.
It's mainly made up of steel with silk braiding holding it all together, and then it's covered in lacquer to protect it from the elements. It makes it a very mobile armour. You've got great dexterity, and so the speed of movement isn't limited. The arm on the outside is excellent, but on the inside is very vulnerable, and the same with the areas around the lower part of the body. Now, the strong dough, the body part is excellent, and also, of course, it's designed in such a way that you've still got plenty of movement left and right and forward and backwards. It's a fantastic balancing act. You've got protection on one side and mobility on the other.
But when choosing their armor, the Ronin have a problem. After years of peace, few have any. And buying new armor, even if they can afford it, will be a major security giveaway. So many of the Ronin have to improvise.
Their armor was made out of bits and pieces of scraps that they'd found, of firemen's helmets and kind of rags and bits of leather stuck together. Why did they do that? Because if you walk into the armor shop and say, I'd like 47 suits of samurai armor, please, it's going to set off a flag. Someone's going to be worried about that.
The Ronin have done everything they can to prepare for battle. A band of fighters the kind of which Japan has never seen, and a mission unlike any other. And then Oishi has a breakthrough. His own intelligence sources have managed to get detailed information about Kira's house.
They knew where his house was. They'd spied out the land. They knew the layout of the building.
And then there's another problem. Before Oishi's men can get anywhere near Kira's house, they have to penetrate a huge and heavily defended perimeter wall.
A Japanese house like that has a very strong wall and quite a high wall. You're talking about heavy-duty defenses. It's not like a modern house. No windows, no glass windows. So it is a mini castle.
And even if they can get over the wall, the Ronin will not have the advantage of a surprise attack for very long. Moving through Kira's house undetected will be nearly impossible.
The samurai house is designed to detect intruders. They didn't have electronic burglar alarms, but they had other ways of detecting intruders. The floor or the way the mats, the tatami mats, are laid out in the house is designed to detect footsteps.
And then there's another problem. The house is full of secret hiding places to buy time for Kira to make good his escape. It makes a quick operation all the harder for Oishi's men. And time is critical, because nearby is a massive garrison of the Shogun's army. Any delay, and the Ronin will be wiped out very quickly. And Kira has his own security force permanently stationed inside the house compound as well. Once inside Kira's house, the Ronin will have minutes to find, seize, and execute Kira before backup troops arrive. It's all starting to look like a long shot at best. The time for waiting is over. The 47 Ronin must go in.
They've waited 2 years to do it. It's a perfect black op. They go in at night, it's snowy, it's raining.
Now, it's a race against time. Oishi knows that as he closes in on his target, the Shogun's army will be summoned against him and his tiny band of men. The chances of being killed before they get to Kira are extremely high. Oishi now orders his men into action. Units steal forward through back streets and undergrowth, getting into position to take the compound. To stop neighbors raising the alarm when the attack starts, 2 units announce that the Ronin are on official business, and amazingly, it works.
When they started the attack on the compound, some of the Ronin's job was to knock on the neighbors' doors and say, "Don't panic, nothing to worry about, go back to bed. It's just a vendetta." Because vendettas are actually legal, but there's a very strict set of regulations. What they wanted the neighbors to do was to say, "Oh, okay, the Shogun approves, we'll go back to bed."
Oishi's next challenge is to get his men into the compound. In a double strategy, an attack force scales the walls of the perimeter, while a second unit takes the guards at the gates.
They had people climb over the walls. There would have been guards inside. And there was a fight in the courtyard with the guards.
The Ronin who scaled the walls now must open the gates, but the guards refuse to hand over the keys. It's all adding time and attracting attention. The attack is already losing vital momentum. There's only one option. The locks need to be smashed. With the whole force of Ronin inside the compound, Kira's own soldiers now must be immobilized and locked down in their barracks.
They go in with these iron clamps that they shove on the doors to keep the soldiers in the barracks. So they've neutralized a huge chunk of Kira's soldiers.
Now the Ronin need to take the house. Inside, Kira is asleep, along with his household. Only speed, ruthlessness, and stealth will get the attackers through. Kira's personal bodyguards will fight with all their might to repel the attackers. while Kira scrambles to escape. The Ronin start a frantic search, spreading through the massive complex, knowing that at any minute, the might of the Japanese National Army might be summoned against them.
Japanese house has very little furniture. Everything is stored in cupboards with sliding doors. So they would have had to fight their way through the house and open all the cupboards to see where he was hiding.
With time nearly up, the Ronin seem to have lost the target. In a desperate measure, a unit of attackers is sent to check out one last possible hiding place.
They didn't find him, so then they had to go outside and look around in the gardens.
And it's in the gardens that Kira is found and seized. The moment that Oishi and his Ronin have waited for 2 long years has arrived. Kira is given the option to take the honorable way out and commit seppuku. But he's too cowardly and must die a shameful death. But simply killing Kira is not enough. They have to prove and account for the kill. And once again, Oishi turns to time-honored samurai convention.
The samurai are a cult of headhunters. They get rewarded for the types of head they bring back, the position and prestige of the head, or the amount of heads. Their entire honor system is based on the quality of the decapitated head that they come home with.
And, according to the samurai code, there is only one person who can reward them: their master, Asano.
If you want to talk about getting medieval, that's exactly what the 47 Ronin did. They walked for 5 miles to leave his head on Asano's tomb. That is an incredibly samurai thing to do.
Now, the Ronin have restored the honor of their master and walked the way of the true samurai, as no one has for nearly 100 years. They have no place in the realm of the living and are resigned to meet Asano in death. They turn themselves into the authorities, and within days, all are dead by seppuku.
These men had kept their martial skills alive for 100 years when they didn't really need them for battle. They weren't corrupted by court life. And they were probably really rough country men who just would not take that sort of treatment and insult. And they stood up to it.
As Edo reels from the extraordinary attack, the 47 Ronin become instant celebrities. Even if the repressive regime of the Shogun forbids open discussion of the terrible events. Today, Lord Oishi and his followers are still celebrated as symbols of ultimate loyalty and are honored as heroes in Japan. They're the special forces of feudal Japan. Shadow warriors who'll stop at nothing to get the job done.
The ninja were very much the unconventional warfare experts which any army needs.
The deadliest killers. Their genius is deception. They're lethal in battle and specialists in cunning, betrayal, and strategy.
Never trust a ninja. Even your own ninjas, do not trust them. They will lie and make things up and cheat.
Ambush, infiltration, assassination, and espionage. Their techniques are timeless and live on in the methods of today's special forces.
Speed, aggression, and surprise, the way they move with silence and stealth and in small teams, it's still very much the same.
Now they're facing the greatest fight in their history. At stake is their very existence, and they'll need everything they've got to survive. This is the incredible story of the ninjas of Iga and their extraordinary rise to become an indispensable part of the Japanese military machine. It's 1562, and Japan is in the grip of a civil war that's lasted over 100 years. Warlords and their militias roam the countryside in a rampage of destruction that's tearing the country apart. In the wilds of central Japan, a year-long campaign is culminating in a siege. And the prize for the attacker is Kaminojo Castle. Determined to take it is an ambitious young warlord called Tokugawa Ieyasu. But he's facing a serious problem. Because inside the castle are his daughters. And they'll be killed if he attacks. Years earlier, he agreed to send them to Kaminojo in a peace deal. It's standard procedure in a country where no one trusts anyone. Now, he badly needs to go back on the deal.
With warlords fighting against each other, allegiances were quite often made and broken at a moment's notice. It was recognized very early on that a hostage system would help keep allegiances. But as long as they behaved and followed the rules, the families would be kept safe. If they broke the rules, the families would be executed, and it was a great way of keeping control.
Despite his massive army, Ieyasu has had his hands tied for over a year. He can't touch the castle. But Ieyasu is smart, and he's contacted a uniquely gifted fighter, a specialist called Hattori Hanzo. And Hanzo is known for one thing: unconventional warfare. Hattori Hanzo is the leader of the finest special forces in the Japanese world. They are experts at a secret martial art called shinobi. Much later, they will be known as ninja.
Ninja is actually a very modern term. But back in the 1500s, they were known as shinobi no mono, shadow warrior. The ninja were renowned for never being spotted and being invisible and having magic powers.
The shinobi warrior of the 1500s is so skilled, he is regarded almost as a supernatural being. But just like today's special forces, he's developed a unique set of tactics. To solve problems on the battlefield, conventional troops can't. And the ninja's particular talent is for intelligence gathering and infiltration.
The samurai army needed spies and it needed commandos. So ninja would develop these skills. They spy and they do commando infiltration raids. And these were needed for frontline troops or for information gathering.
And there's another reason why Hattori Hanzo and his ninja are so highly prized. Japanese armies are run by an officer class of samurai. At the heart of their combat training is a strict code of gentlemanly honor. And the one thing they won't touch are dirty tricks. What we call black ops. Assassination, murder, and sabotage.
The ninja were very much the unconventional warfare experts which any army needs. Samurai honor precluded them from doing certain tasks that they saw beneath them. The ninja didn't follow the same code of honor and were able to effectively achieve what the samurai could not.
Hanzo and his ninja are the best in the business. He even has a track record in one particular area of shinobi. He's an old hand at penetrating castles and freeing hostages. Ieyasu doesn't take much persuading to sign the ninja up. And there's just one order. Rescue my daughters.
Now Ieyasu saw the immense capability of Hattori Hanzo as the commander, the general for the ninja. And he brought him in as one of his generals. And as one of his generals, he was feared and he became known as Devil Hanzo.
Hattori Hanzo now starts an intelligence gathering operation that will decide his strategy. To do that, he'll draw to the full on his shinobi skills. But the mission and his options are familiar to operatives everywhere. Tactics that are routine today were pioneered by the Shadow Warriors 500 years ago.
The ninjas have developed a series of tactics that are almost universal and they haven't really evolved or changed much. There's little marginal improvements here and there and technology comes into it in different weapon systems. The essential elements are still very much the same. Speed, aggression and surprise. The way they move with silence and stealth and in small teams, it's still very much the same.
One man who knows all about the problems facing Hattori Hanzo's ninjas at Kaminojo is Jason Williams. Now living in Japan, he fought for 5 years in Iraq and Afghanistan with the SAS. And that presented intelligence gathering challenges that are very familiar to Hattori Hanzo. Getting good information boils down to a handful of options.
You're usually going into an enemy complex or an enemy building, maybe an enemy compound. There are two ways of doing it. You can do a long-term operation or you can do a short-term. Long-term means more of a sleeper cell approach. You'll be going in maybe a few years before you even get any information out. It's a very long-term operation and there's a lot more risk to the individual who's involved and a lot more stress on them.
By the time he's approached by Ieyasu, Hanzo has already put in a sleeper cell of ninjas. who have been undercover, posing as civilians living near the castle. It's a classic shinobi tactic. When hostilities start hotting up, the Lord of Kaminojo starts hiring local men, not realizing who they are. And the ninja sleeper cell walks right into the castle unopposed.
When their lord would start to invade, the ninja would get hired into his retinue. This meant that the ninja was on the inside of the enemy.
As well as using his spies on the inside, just like special forces today, Honjo sends commandos on a reconnaissance mission to assess the target's defenses.
You set up what we call a CTR, close target recce. You get as much information about the complex and around that area as possible. And then once you've done that, you can either go inside or you can withdraw.
Now that Honjo has twin sources of information about the target, he can build his strategy. He decides to climb the walls of the castle alone, while his commando support will wait for a signal. Then, he'll go on into the complex in a solo snatch operation. As soon as the princesses are safe, the sleeper agents on the inside will signal for the attack to start. With forces on the inside and outside, it will be a pincer operation. And Honjo is ready to go. It is now vital to ensure the timing is right, and all conditions favor the ninja.
Now, normally a ninja did not infiltrate in the full moon. He'd wait till 8 days after the moon or 8 days before the moon, so it was darker, and he'd wear dark clothes.
Using tried and tested ninja techniques, Honjo now rises up the castle walls.
He'd use iron spikes, and he'd place spikes in the castle wall, and he'd climb all the way up to the top.
Once at the top, the ninja starts to saw through the walls using special shinobi tools.
This is a type of saw called a shikoro. It was used for making larger holes in clay or wooden walls. Usually so a ninja could climb through. In ancient Japan it was standard kit for breaking into houses.
And then on the inside of the clay walls, they'd have a crisscross of bamboo. He'd cut out a section, he'd go inside.
But scaling walls in total silence and secrecy is the easy part. Honjo must now move unseen through a castle full of soldiers waiting for him.
Now, once he'd inside, he'd wait. He would be waiting for the people to come along with torches on patrol.
Honjo's ninja skills allow him to elude detection completely. But he can't afford to relax. He knows the enemy will have prepared for him.
He has to be careful because their dark patrol comes past. These are the people without torches. They would be looking for ninjas.
Sleeper agents meet Honjo to direct him to the royal apartments. After that, he's on his own. The ninja must now overcome sentries and make his way deep into the castle complex. Once again, he turns to classic shinobi techniques to fell his enemies. With the guards dispatched, Honjo must seize the hostages. As planned, the ninja double agents signal to Hanzo's commandos and Iyasu's samurai by starting fires on the inside of the castle. The commandos penetrate the defenses as Iyasu's conventional forces overwhelm the castle. The hostages are smuggled out in the mayhem.
This operation is a classic example of ninja technique. Being able to infiltrate the enemy's positions, influence what went on, and to attack from within. Classic shinobi.
Hanzo's success not only confirms his reputation, but that of his fearsome homeland, now acknowledged as the region with the best ninja in Japan. It's a place of mists. On a high mountain plateau cut off from the rest of the country, its people are different, fierce mountain folk with proud, independent spirits. Its name is Iga.
Ninja were mainly hired from Iga. The Iga people were known as the best ninja. They would go across all of Japan and they would present themselves to their lords and say, I'm a ninja, I am from Iga, I am trained in the arts of ninjutsu. Then the lord would hire them.
The ninja or shinobi skills practiced by the men of Iga have been developed over centuries of warfare. They draw together the extreme physical power of the martial artist, the swordsmanship of the samurai warrior, with tactical expertise from ancient China and the writings of the Chinese master military strategist Sun Tzu. And it's in the rural hinterlands and highland villages where shinobi is perfected. Living in Iga means surviving a harsh mountain climate. And by the time a ninja starts his training, he's already tough. But to be allowed to become a shinobi warrior, he must go through a series of brutal tests.
The ninja needed to survive in a huge variety of environments, whether on operations or intelligence gathering. And they trained for that by enduring exposure and low temperatures at high altitude.
Like special forces today, constant training in mountain survival is at the core of the making of an effective operative.
All the soldiers have to go through a process which would involve testing their individual fitness in lone, isolated marches in mountainous terrain. Then their personal skills would be tested to the utmost. They'd be isolated in a combat survival environment where they'd be exposed in a wilderness with minimum supplies.
As part of his training, the ninja must learn to live off the land for an indefinite period.
The ninja were experts in optimizing their diet so they could resist cold and hunger. They developed a special ration pack, and just one would keep them going for up to 3 days. A lot of the ninja's art is really about survival and endurance.
It isn't just physical demands that the trainee ninja has to learn to cope with.
The entire point of a ninja's training was about endurance. He had to endure mental problems. He would be in the enemy's land, and he had to train himself to not break under pressure.
The people of Iga mostly worship nature spirits and follow Shintoism, a religious practice focused on the natural world. For an undercover ninja, becoming one with nature is a perfect training for blending in with the environment.
A ninja is a specialist of blending with the surrounding, is the ultimate expression of what in a way Shintoism is all about. It's about achieving utmost harmony with the environment. So a ninja would disappear to the eyes of the common viewer because he managed to become almost sort of seamlessly connected to the nature around it.
Just like the ninja in 16th century Japan, today's special forces, like the Navy SEALs or the SAS, have an advanced training in camouflage and concealment.
The ability to blend in with your surroundings is an essential skill. If you're in any natural area in countryside, you're always aware of how people are looking at you, or where they're going to be looking at you from.
The SAS, like the ninja, have a sense of concealment drilled into them, so it becomes instinctive when operating covertly. Shape, shine, shadow, and silhouette are a constant concern.
There's shape. There's not many round shapes in nature or perfectly straight lines. Then there's shine, the bridge of your nose, your forehead, any metal on your weapon. You want to eliminate any shadow coming from yourself. If you're on a ridge line, you should avoid silhouetting yourself. Be mindful of your footfall. Leave no sign. Don't cause disturbances. You know, if there's a branch on the floor, don't snap it or brush up against tree branches.
Over several centuries, the ninja rise to become an indispensable part of the Japanese military machine as intelligence gatherers and operational agents. Like the best security and special forces of the modern era, they are never satisfied, constantly upping their game and devising new strategies and techniques to gain advantage. But now, 17 years after the siege at Kaminojo Castle, the Iga ninja face their biggest danger yet. It's a gigantic army, rolling through the country, crushing all it encounters. And it's led by a cruel overlord, known for his love of extreme violence. He's a genocidal megalomaniac, with a reputation unmatched in all of Japan's bloody history. Oda Nobunaga is bent on one thing: absolute power.
Nobunaga's plan was to unify all of Japan, and that was his one goal. So nobody was spared from his forces or his army. This is what he was going to do.
Oda Nobunaga is single-minded, cold, calculating, and disciplined, and he crushes all resistance with utter ruthlessness. The trouble is, the Iga don't bow down to anyone.
In the late 1500s, the ninjas had a serious problem. Nobunaga needed complete and total obedience, and they refused to give it.
Two opposing forces are on a collision course. Neither is used to giving way, and a devastating confrontation is inevitable.
The only solution Nobunaga had was to invade, and he did so with a vengeance.
To tame the ninjas of Iga, Nobunaga sends in his toughest samurai. Crack troops, hardened by decades of bloodletting. The orders are to spare no one. But he makes one fatal error. He appoints a general who is completely unsuited to the job. That general is his son. Nobukatsu. Nobukatsu has no experience. Not just that, he's impetuous and undisciplined. It's about the worst combination of qualities a military leader could have. And he makes a host of errors. One of the worst is to underestimate his enemy. He thinks the code of honor of his samurai gentleman cannot fail against people he dismisses as a bunch of eager peasants.
Right from the beginning, Nobukatsu made some basic mistakes. He utilized warfare in a samurai mentality. He didn't recognize that you needed special forces. And his biggest mistake was not using ninja of his own.
Without intelligence from ninja spies, Nobukatsu charges blindly into enemy territory. From that, 3 fatal flaws in his strategy emerge.
He didn't prepare properly. He didn't get the lay of the land, and he chose a direct route without doing any reconnaissance.
It's a serious blunder. Nobukatsu is entering unknown territory. And what he doesn't know is that Iga is unlike any other place in Japan.
Iga has a river running through the middle called the Hattori, and on certain days the whole valley is thick with a mist. Sometimes Iga can seem like a hidden world, shrouded in mist and fog.
Nobukatsu's samurai now enter narrow gorges with no idea of what's waiting for them. Suddenly, in front of them, is the last person Nobukatsu and his troops want to see. It's Hattori, the devil, Hanzo. Just at that moment, the weather closes in.
Fog suddenly filled the valley, and this is where the ninja do what they do best. They got down close and personal. They attacked from the sides and from the back, infiltrating the ranks of the samurai, causing chaos. So much chaos, in fact, that the samurai began to cut each other down, not knowing who the enemy was.
It's an ambush that's textbook ninja, drawing the samurai into unfamiliar terrain and destroying them with tactics they're completely unprepared for. It has disastrous consequences for the invaders. Nobukatsu's bodyguards are cut to pieces. Now the general must stand alone against the ninja and account for himself.
And in that chaos, Nobukatsu made a run for it. And he was the only one to survive a complete massacre.
The defeat sends shockwaves through the country. The almost total annihilation of Nobunaga's finest samurai goes down as one of the ninja's greatest triumphs. But it will also unleash forces that will test the men of Iga as never before. Within days, The ninja spy network reports Nobunaga mustering the biggest army Japan has ever seen. Columns are streaming from every region with one order: destroy Iga. The ninja know they can't defeat so huge an army, and there is only one solution. Nobunaga must be assassinated. There's only one shinobi warrior who can do the job. Born into a powerful Iga clan, the ninja Ishikawa Goemon has every reason to want to kill Nobunaga personally. His whole family was murdered by Nobunaga's forces, and getting revenge has been his life's ambition. The job of killing Nobunaga will go down as the toughest assignment ever faced by a ninja assassin. The warlord is constantly surrounded by a crack force of bodyguards and employs ninja killers himself from the Iga's rivals. He has a highly skilled network of spies adept at infiltrating and extracting information throughout Japan. Nobunaga knows that the Iga are almost certainly plotting to kill him, and he's convinced he's ready for them. But the Iga spy network manages to secure some crucial information. The only time Nobunaga lets his guard down is when he's in his heavily fortified castle. Goemon's only chance is to infiltrate the castle and, using double agents on the inside, assassinate the warlord himself in the royal apartments. Ninja Black Ops techniques are at the height of development, and their armory boasts a massive array of weapons and technology unmatched anywhere. Goemon now has everything put at his disposal.
The ninja had something called the art of fire, and they used gunpowder for everything from signaling to explosions and lighting effects. And they were masters at vanishing behind smoke screens.
But Goemon knows that Nobunaga is fully aware of the ninja's specialist tools and tactics. To kill the overlord, he's going to have to surprise Nobunaga and think laterally. He decides to use poison, but it has to be done in a truly novel way.
There's different ways to use poison. You can either go in a house as someone's guest and you can poison the people there. One manual tells us to use strychnine, and they would mix it with cakes and they would give it to people that way.
Goemon knows poisoned cakes won't work. Nobunaga keeps a retinue of food tasters precisely to protect him from this threat. The ninja needs something more cunning.
They did something called well poisoning. They take the poisonous part of a puffer fish and they mix it with excrement or lead and arsenic. And they would drop this into the enemy's well.
Once again, Nobunaga's tasters would detect poisoned water well before it reached the overlord's lips. Goemon realizes he must deliver the toxin to Nobunaga personally, and he'll only get one shot. He turns to a substance that remains today one of the most toxic in the world. It's called wolfsbane. A couple of drops will kill an adult in minutes. There is no antidote. Victims die writhing in agony. Now Goemon must craft his method of delivery, and he only has the tools and materials of his remote mountain community. Fortunately, the ninja are masters at repurposing everyday items into weapons.
One of the things that the ninja were very good at was adaptation and using anything at their disposal as a weapon. Now, the word weapon can tend to get people quite narrow-minded, but the ninja thought of weapons as more as tools, and that allowed them to be very adaptable and very flexible.
Ninjas were recruited from relatively low-income part of the population. They were accustomed to use very basic tools connected to agricultural activities. So most of the weapons resembled tools that you would find, in a garden or something like that.
A traditional sickle in the hands of a ninja, for instance, has multiple uses in a combat situation.
This is called a kusarigama. Eager farmers cut hay with it, but the ninja used it as a weapon in two ways. First, the ninja would throw the iron weight at the end of the chain so it wrapped around the legs of the enemy. When he fell, the ninja would attack him with the blade. Very effective.
Goemon's plan is now ready. He's going to put the wolf's bane into Nobunaga's mouth in a way no one's ever thought of. But before he goes into action, there's one more vital element for the ninja's attack.
In the chaos of battle, fear is the greatest enemy, and the ninja learnt from a very early stage that fear is something to be embraced. And so quite often before an operation, they would begin a meditation. They would meditate on the fact that they had no home, no family, no friends, no country. All they had was themselves, their weapons, and their spirit. And this was so that they could act completely without distraction.
Goemon turns to his spiritual training of Shintoism to prepare his mind for the assignment. He uses an ancient practice that hones concentration and produces complete psychological detachment from fear. It's called Kuji-kiri.
Kuji-kiri is one of the ninja spiritual arts. A ninja would summon 9 concepts with his hands to make his mind strong. They're power, energy, harmony, healing, intuition, awareness, force, creation, zen.
Goemon has submitted himself utterly to the protection of his spiritual guides, and his mind is in peak readiness. Now he must go in. In classic style, Goemon makes himself virtually invisible as he closes in on Nobunaga's apartments. Double agents working on the warlord's staff have given him the information he needs to navigate his way to the target. Once inside the apartment complex, he maneuvers himself to a space above the royal bedchamber. Ninja agents in the castle have drilled a tiny hole in the ceiling and positioned the royal bed so that the target's head is directly beneath it. Now the ninja applies the wolf's bane to the string. But just as he's delivering the lethal dose, Nobunaga wakes. Goemon knows he's failed.
No, now, we must go now.
And now must escape the only way he can.
When a ninja wanted to escape, he could do a few things. Normally, they would have caltrops. Now, caltrops are small balls of iron with spikes moving out, and he'd position these in certain places where he knew the enemy would chase him. So those pursuers would stand on it, falling over.
Goemon has slowed his pursuers, but he's still not safe. If the samurai bodyguards catch up with him, he's dead. Now he has to reach for another tool in the ninja system. It's time for the shuriken.
手裏剣なんですね。だからこれ
The
は
ninja would use shuriken like this when they were on the run from the enemy. They're secretly held and used in an extreme situation. They'd throw them at the enemy like this.
Goemon may have failed, but the assassination attempt is a textbook example of shinobi ingenuity. Adapting simple everyday objects to lethal effect. Nobunaga now goes on the warpath against the ninjas of Iga with violent determination. He takes personal command of his massive army and launches it against the whole region. Unlike his son Nobukatsu, he uses ninjas who are Hanzo's deadliest rivals. He gives only one order: spare no one.
もう具体的に言うと
Nobunaga was completely cold-blooded. He ordered his soldiers to kill everyone in Iga. Women, children, or monks. They were all slaughtered, regardless. The killing made the Iga ninjas scatter across Japan.
It's a bloodletting that remains notorious in Japanese history to this day. Nothing is left of the old Iga villages.
Nobunaga had destroyed their homes, destroyed their families. This made them drop in social class. They had been displaced. This changed the history of the Iga people forever.
The once proud ninjas of Iga are now scattered and in flight, while Nobunaga's troops scour the hills to hunt them down. All looks lost for them, with no land, no status, and no money. All they can do is hope to scrape a living as peasants in some other region where no one will know them. Then, just as all seems lost, some extraordinary news comes through. In a palace coup, the cruel overlord, Oda Nobunaga, has been assassinated at Kyoto.
Nobunaga had just become the ultimate power in Japan, and he sent his troops out to the provinces to spread the word. While Nobunaga was distracted, one of his close generals took advantage of that and assassinated Nobunaga to take power for himself.
It's good news for the ninjas of Iga, but it also plunges Japan into political chaos. Nobunaga's killers now turn on the overlord's allies. Summary executions of all the senior figures associated with the old regime begin immediately. One high-ranking warlord in particular is suddenly in serious trouble. He's none other than Tokugawa Ieyasu. He has risen to become a close strategic ally of Nobunaga, and by chance, happened to be visiting him. Now Ieyasu's far from home and on the wrong side, while a revolution erupts around him. The road home is teeming with his enemies, and he's trapped.
When Oda Nobunaga was assassinated, Tokugawa Ieyasu found himself in a really dangerous situation. He had to get home, he had to get back to his lands. However, which was the best way to go? How could he do this?
The only way Ieyasu can get home is to take a perilous journey across the mountains of Iga. It's a golden opportunity for Honjo, who immediately uses his contacts and his dispossessed ninja force to help his old friend.
Iga is Hanzo's home territory. The Iga people still there didn't trust Ieyasu. But Honjo persuaded them to protect him and help him across the mountains. Honjo had great authority with his people and used his connections and influence in Iga.
As Ieyasu, Honjo, and their men flee across the mountains, word gets back to the new regime. A hunter-killer unit of samurai pursue the ninjas, believing they can stop the escaping force and seize Ieyasu. This time it's the ninja who will face an ambush. It's a narrow escape for Tokugawa Ieyasu, but the making of Hattori Hanzo and his ninjas.
Now, because of this, Tokugawa Ieyasu was extremely grateful. They had saved his life. So he hired up to 100 of their men to help guard him at Edo Castle, modern-day Tokyo.
With Nobunaga dead, the number of military campaigns and warring factions starts to dwindle. Ieyasu's political career finally takes him to the very top, and he assumes complete control of a united and peaceful Japan. His triumph inaugurates a golden era for Japan and a 265-year dynasty of shoguns. And with them all the way are the ninja and the descendants of the greatest of them all, Hattori, the Devil, Hanzo.
The Honjo Masamune is the ultimate samurai sword. In Japan, it's regarded as a national treasure, a thing of beauty, shaped by fire, a thing of power, born of water. Forged centuries ago by master swordsmith Masamune.
If it's a Masamune, it's almost like having crown jewels.
Proven in battle for centuries. Legend tells of a just blade, discerning and honorable. It was venerated as the hereditary sword of power by the ruling shoguns. Passed from generation to generation for 700 years. But in the aftermath of the Second World War, it disappeared.
It is the vanished embodiment of Japanese tradition and an object of great desire.
Records tell us a mysterious US sergeant took it to be destroyed. But some say he saved it and took it home to America. Now worth millions of dollars, experts believe it may still be out there.
I still somehow feel that it still does exist, possibly unrecognized.
This is the story of the ancient legendary Honjo Masamune, lost sword of the samurai. In the late 13th century, the rulers of Kamakura province near Tokyo had a serious problem. The invading Mongol hordes of Kublai Khan. Under the onslaught, their weapons simply weren't up to the task.
When the Mongol invasion happened, Japanese swords were nice, slender, beautiful-looking things, but they broke on the Mongol armour.
To solve this problem, they turned to swordsmith Nayudo Masamune. Masamune's task was to redesign the Japanese sword to withstand the armor and kill the Mongol invaders. Masamune developed techniques that have never been surpassed. First, Masamune beat red-hot high-carbon steel into a thick rectangular billet. Then cutting and folding it again and again, he forged a blade composed of over 30,000 layers. To the thick back edge and the thin cutting edge, he gave very different properties. And these were born not from the heat of the fire, but how the steel cooled in water.
The cutting edge, because it hardened quickly, is very, very hard, almost as hard as glass, but it's brittle.
The thicker, heavier back edge gave up its heat more slowly. This changed the structure of the iron itself, making it far less hard but more flexible than the vulnerable sharp edge.
The back, because it cools slowly, is tough and malleable, and it supports and stops that brittle edge cracking.
In battle, the thin edge was used defensively to cut. It is rigid and razor sharp, and the back used defensively as a shield, its flexible spine absorbing impact. But to withstand the Mongol armor, Masamune also made his blades broader from edge to back for strength, the point longer to pierce, and the hardened edge deeper to aid repair. And so, Masamune brought the samurai sword to the peak of perfection, exemplified by the Honjo Masamune. Not just a weapon, but a work of art, an object of beauty. And Masamune's name still resonates throughout Japan today.
He's known to school children in Japan. They might know nothing else about Japanese swords, but his name is known.
Over the centuries, many legends have grown up about the great Masamune and the magical qualities of his swords. One of Masamune's pupils thought that after many years' training, he had surpassed his master. To test the quality of their respective blades, they suspended them in a stream. The student's blade was so sharp that it cut leaves and twigs, everything in its path. Masamune's blade, just as sharp, cut nothing. The student claimed victory, but a bystander disagreed. He observed that Masamune's blade did not cut needlessly. It was discerning and honorable, a just blade.
Masamune is generally given the titles Goro Nayudo, which have Buddhist implications, suggesting he was of the priesthood, or at least a devout follower of Buddha.
His finest work, the Honjo Masamune, was primarily a weapon for cutting human flesh. And the samurai would develop a very practical method for testing blades.
For a fee, an official tester would use a blade on a corpse from the execution grounds and report back to the owner on how it cut and how it behaved and how many bodies and which particular part of the body to cut.
The edge was sharp and the back strong, but yet another key property made the sword so deadly: its curve.
Swords were made curved because they cut flesh better when they're curved. There's a slicing action that's automatically built into the cut.
There are diagrams which show the various cuts that were tested.
The easiest was to chop through a wrist or an ankle. The most difficult would be through the pelvic girdle or the shoulder girdle, and diagonally down through the rib cage, and cuts like that.
As a permanent record, the test results would be carved into the sword's tang under the mounted grip.
It shows that these swordsmiths had great concern, not only just for the look of their swords, but of the effectiveness of their swords.
History doesn't record precisely when Masamune drew from his furnace the greatest blade he ever made, the Honjo Masamune. Around the year 1300 is the closest anyone can say. Nothing is known of its early life or battles, who wore it proudly in his belt, or who inherited it over the centuries. Such a fine sword would have played an important part in the rigid social structure of feudal Japan, in which everyone knew their place.
At the top was the Shogun, who was if you like, a military dictator. Below him would be various large landowners.
The powerful landowning lords, the daimyos, were protected by the knightly class, the samurai. The name literally means one who serves.
The soul of a samurai is to serve. The soul of a samurai is to wait. The soul of a samurai is to follow his lord, until such time as his lord may want him.
The sword was an essential part of a samurai's dress, the uniform of his class. The long sword was a large part of who he was.
The sword was something more than just a weapon. It was his most prized possession. It was described as the soul of the samurai.
The sword was an important thing for the samurai because it was their badge of rank. It was their status symbol, if you like.
Just as a samurai's life belonged to his lord, lives of those with a lower rank, farmers and peasants, belonged to him.
The samurai were allowed to cut down anybody without any excuse. If you insulted me and you were a peasant, I could just cut you down and that was it.
The Honjo Masamune first enters recorded history when, 300 years after it was made, it got its name. In the 16th century, in battle, General Honjo Shigenaga was attacked by an enemy with Masamune's masterpiece. The sword had already claimed a number of trophy heads that day, but General Honjo Shigenaga prevailed, and finally victorious took the sword as his prize. From then on, it bears his name, Honjo Masamune. Soon afterwards, General Shigenaga was ordered to Fushimi Castle. But short of money, he sold the now priceless sword for 13 large gold coins. At today's gold prices, around £2,500. It was now that the Honjo Masamune was transformed from a valued weapon to priceless symbol of absolute power. The superlative sword became the ultimate gift to pass up the social ladder to nobles of ascending rank as a token of esteem. Eventually, it was received in tribute by warlord Tokugawa Ieyasu. With the Honjo Masamune at his side, Tokugawa Ieyasu was about to change the course of Japanese history. Japan was being torn apart by civil war. Daimyo against daimyo, samurai against samurai, each fighting loyally for his lord to the death. Finally, in 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu amassed enough military power to seize overall control. He made the emperor a mere figurehead. Ieyasu himself would rule all Japan as military dictator. He would be the shogun.
Japan was at war for 150 years between the 15th and the 16th centuries. And the great Tokugawa achievement is to make peace break out, if you like.
The Tokugawa shoguns brought 250 years of peace to Japan. And their ceremonial sword was the Honjo Masamune. Over the centuries, the hereditary sword of the shoguns was passed from generation to generation. Even after the Tokugawas fell from power in 1868, the great sword continued to be handed down within the aristocratic family into the 20th century. In 1939 in Tokyo, it was designated a Japanese national treasure, a survivor of 700 years of turbulent history. It was only in the upheaval of the Second World War that the mystery of the Honjo Masamune begins, when it disappeared. Japan entered World War II in 1941 with a surprise attack on the US Navy anchored at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. As Japan poured millions of troops into battle, the High Command boosted recruitment and morale by fostering the ideals of Japan's ancient past, Bushido, the way of the warrior, and the heroic exploits of the samurai. So they gave out swords.
If you were recruiting people from backgrounds which had no military history whatsoever, the simple act of recruiting them, giving them a sword, or allowing them to wear a sword and carry a sword was, in a way, elevating them in status and giving them a pride.
Every officer, sergeant and corporal had to wear a sword as part of his uniform. The sheer number required was huge. So these modern military swords were not hand-beaten by master craftsmen in the traditional way.
A lot of swords made for officer class were mass-produced from pieces of steel, usually a piece of railway line. A lot were made in factories. All of the swords made for NCOs were mass-produced in factories from ordinary steel.
By the Second World War, there are estimated to have been as many as 2 million swords worn by the Japanese military. The symbolism of the sword continued to be promoted in Japanese propaganda throughout World War II. This pilot on the cover of Japanese propaganda magazine Front in 1943 carries his sword center frame as a symbol of honor, justice, and fighting spirit.
It's a very well-informed, very well-composed, highly artistic, and very effective image. But it's not true. This is not how pilots got into planes. This is staged. But samurai myths about sacrifice become very useful for steeling yourself before you are going to get into the cockpit of a plane in which you are probably going to die.
For the Japanese, war was a fight to the death. The emperor and the government could not countenance surrender. On August the 6th and 9th, 1945, American B-29 aircraft dropped a nuclear bomb on 2 Japanese cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Just 6 days later, the Japanese had to bear the unbearable, think the unthinkable. They surrendered.
Across the radio comes the voice of the emperor, which nobody's heard before. And it's a very strange voice, it's a very high voice, it's a very weak voice. He's talking in a language that most of them don't understand. But the message is clear. We've lost.
At the end of the Second World War, the average Japanese person would have been totally devastated by having suffered defeat, a loss of face. But on the other hand, the war was over, and the hardship they'd been through, the firebombing, the starvation, was finished.
Not for the first time in Japanese history, the emperor had to move aside for a powerful shogun. Shogun is a very old title in Japanese history. It means not just military commander, but supreme dictator. And the man the United States sent to rule occupied Japan was certainly that. 5-star General Douglas MacArthur.
You get this tall, white American stepping out of an airplane in a very theatrical way. He's dressed very particularly, his collar is open, you know, and this is the new guy in town. MacArthur was a dictator, and he was the supreme commander. It's a time of chaos, and MacArthur's there to do a very particular job, and he's very aware of the job he's going to do. He's very charismatic, he's very savvy. There's a very famous photograph, for example, of MacArthur standing next to the emperor in morning coat, looking incredibly formal. MacArthur again with the open shirt collar and towering over him. And of course it's a way of making a very profound statement.
MacArthur officially accepted the Japanese surrender in a ceremony aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on the 2nd of September 1945.
It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past.
As soon as the surrender was signed, MacArthur, as Supreme Commander Allied Powers, set to work. He issued SCAP General Order No. 1. The immediate surrender of all Japanese armed forces. MacArthur demanded they cease hostilities and lay down their arms.
At the beginning of the occupation, though, there are 2 main objectives. The first, the urgent one, is demilitarization. You have to take the stuff away, you have to make sure they don't do it again.
MacArthur's plan was to make sure Japan could never wage war again. Total demilitarization and disarmament were paramount.
They destroyed a lot of, honest-to-God, modern military material, planes and so on and so forth. They also collected a lot of gunpowder, which of course has its uses. They just collected everything.
MacArthur soon destroyed hundreds of ships and thousands of planes. But what should he do with all those swords? Every Japanese officer, sergeant and corporal carried one at his side. There were millions of them, but MacArthur was determined to collect every one. Not because the swords were a military threat, but because of their enduring symbolic importance.
Certainly, taking away weapons is one way of demonstrating your authority. And of course, the sword is not, in the end, a weapon. It's a symbolic statement about authority. It's the thing that somebody would carry who was in charge. So to take the symbol of authority away is important.
All over the Pacific, surrender ceremonies were organized by the victorious Allies. On parade grounds in Sumatra, Burma and Malaya, Japanese fighting men suffered the humiliation of surrendering their treasured swords to the Americans.
Your government, regarding military swords as weapons, does not acknowledge the wearing of swords as dress, and we have been ordered to surrender all kinds of swords. Japanese officers are extremely dejected and troubled.
What the Allies didn't realize was that some of the swords were not modern, mass-produced weapons, but handcrafted antiques of great value.
Some families at the beginning of the war who did own swords that had been in the family for many, many generations and possibly had been used in warfare in the distant past, took them to battle, having picked up a tradition that had been going on for centuries of carrying an ancestor's sword into battle.
Surrendering a venerable family heirloom was especially painful.
I cannot help heaving a deep sigh of sorrow in parting with my most beloved sword, my spirit, with which my ancestors went to war, and which my father himself handed over to me when I set out from home for this war, praying for my heroic victory in every action.
Hundreds of thousands of swords were surrendered, but what to do with them? Some were awarded to Allied officers or to civilians who had distinguished themselves in the war effort. To one, a crude, mass-produced blade, to another, perhaps a centuries-old work of art. The Americans didn't know or care. But most of the swords were not given away. They were destroyed. The SCAP instruction for disarmament applied not only to frontline soldiers, but the people of Japan at home too. Even swords in private hands. The Honjo Masamune in the Tokugawa mansion in Tokyo was no exception.
Collect and deliver all arms in the possession of the Japanese civilian population.
All of the swords in Japan were rounded up into centres, usually warehouses or school gymnasiums, and piled high ready for destruction.
The order to collect all swords meant just that. These seizures were indiscriminate. Family heirlooms decorating homes and masterpieces in collections were commandeered as quickly as military blades.
The people who were handling the swords, who were sweeping them up in the dragnet, were quite low-level functionaries, very hard-pressed for time, as low-level functionaries normally are. They're not colonels with an enormous amount of time on their hand. They don't know what they're dealing with.
The owners of swords were instructed to take them to collection points such as police stations. Even the aristocratic Tokugawa family, who as shoguns once ruled Japan, were not exempt. The SCAP instructions were law, and they were ordered to relinquish all their fine swords, including the legendary Honjo Masamune. In Japan, there was outrage. Would they really have to give it up to the Americans, who appreciated nothing of its history or symbolism? Influential people, collectors and museum curators, were soon complaining to SCAP about this assault on the Japanese heritage.
Very quickly they discover that there's blowback, if you like, that they are being indiscriminate and that they're annoying some people. Of course, they learn more very quickly. They learn that some people don't like having their swords taken away. They learn that there are collectors of Japanese swords who have nice collections, which got caught up in the dragnet.
A key figure in trying to save swords, like the Honjo Masamune, was Dr. Junji Homa of the Tokyo Museum. He met military police commander Colonel Victor C. Cadwell of the US 8th Army, the officer in charge of weapons collection. Dr. Homa explained that some swords were ancient works of an almost forgotten art, like the cathedrals of the West, a vivid symbol that was an extension of the samurai himself, influencing Japanese art and literature. Dr. Homa argued that they were not military weapons at all. Treasures like the Honjo Masamune were art swords.
It was people like Homa who coined the phrase of Japanese art swords in order to save them from destruction by the occupying forces.
It was essential they were preserved because they were part of Japan's historic artistic inheritance. Then this term art sword was devised.
Homa succeeded and convinced Colonel Cadwell that Japanese swords were not simply wartime weapons and should no longer be treated as such. SCAP Instruction 12 tried to clarify the situation.
You are advised that if these swords are the personal property of those officers concerned, they may be retained on condition that henceforth it will be understood that they have no military significance whatsoever, but are household treasures.
But Cadwell didn't have the final word. As late as November the 11th, 1945, contradictory orders were issued by SCAP.
All swords, including privately owned swords, shall be treated as symbols of militarism and destroyed.
As a result, valuable antique blades continued to be swept up.
Sadly, a lot of very fine traditional swords did go into the melting pot.
Some families protected their heirlooms by deceiving the Americans.
Certain families in Japan deliberately acquired what I can only describe as very poor quality swords and hid their better swords because they knew they were going to be taken by the victors.
But the Tokugawa family did no such thing. They took a very different, honorable course and accepted the latest edict from SCAP. Just before Christmas 1945, the last known owner of the Honjo Masamune, Tokugawa Ieyasu, a descendant of the shoguns, obeyed the law and delivered the family's swords to Majiro police station.
The family still does have ownership of it, and so they can do something useful, which is their duty. Because, of course, the symbolic value of the old military family of Japan, the first military family of Japan, giving up the symbol of their authority to the new occupiers in order that Japan can embark on a new path.
Tokugawa Ieyasu handed in 15 swords, bundled all together. And among them was the finest sword ever made, the Honjo Masamune. Mr. Tokugawa never saw the great family sword again. The Honjo Masamune disappeared, and entered the realm of conjecture and mystery. The first clue to what became of the lost sword of the samurai appeared in New York 20 years after the end of World War II. The August 1966 edition of Saga, an American adventure and mystery magazine, contained an article listing Japanese national treasures that went missing after the war. The list of 14 swords included the Honjo Masamune. Here in black and white, it recorded that a Sergeant Cole D. Bymore of the 7th US Cavalry had collected it from the police station at Majiro. But how reliable was this record? What is undoubtedly true is that the 7th Cavalry patrols were in Tokyo and did make inventories of all arsenals, factories, barracks, and storage depots. They also disposed of munitions and conducted patrols in search of hidden Japanese weapons, including swords. This corroborates the Saga magazine article. The next question is, did Sergeant Cole D. Bymore take the sword from the police station? Unfortunately, all police records for the period in question are lost. But there is another source, the Japanese Department of Education. Their records at the time make it clear that the Honjo Masamune certainly was taken from Majiro police station by Sergeant Bymore. But where did he take it? All over Japan, collected swords were piled high in warehouses before being dumped at sea or melted down for scrap iron. In Tokyo, for Sergeant Cole D. Bymore, storage was at the Akabane depot. To avoid the destruction of art swords, every blade at Akabane was scrutinized by Dr. Junji Homa's inspection committee. It was a big success. Nearly 5,000 swords were identified as important cultural artifacts and returned to their owners. But the Honjo Masamune was not among them. Was it fed to the furnace and destroyed? Or did Cole D. Bymore keep it for himself?
I think it's most unlikely that the Honjo Masamune sword did go into a melting pot. The Tokugawa, having been shoguns of Japan, and hence at the pinnacle of Japanese society, would have had some extremely fine swords. And I'm pretty sure that even the police in the local police station and the sergeant to which they were handed over to would have recognised the quality of the mountings, if nothing else. And therefore, I suspect they were shipped back to America pretty quickly.
What is certainly true is that the American Army operated an official war trophy system. A GI who had taken part in the Pacific War could, with the correct permission slip, take home one enemy gun and one sword as personal souvenirs. Most of these returning men were carrying mass-produced military swords, nothing special. But some GIs unknowingly had centuries-old works of art of great cultural and monetary value. It's very possible that the Honjo Masamune was taken by Cole D. Bymore as his personal memento. If this was true, the question then became, when did Sergeant Bymore get shipped home? And did he carry the Honjo Masamune with him? At this point, the trail becomes even more obscured. 7th Cavalry records should reveal when Sergeant Coldy Bymore left Japan and when he arrived home. But the 7th Cavalry Veterans Association lists no one by that name. Does that mean there never was a Coldy Bymore? The facts are more complicated. The Saga magazine article contains another clue. It describes the name Coldy Bymore as phonetic. This indicates it's a translation from English into Japanese. The strange name Coldy Bymore may be inaccurate.
We're moving between languages. We're moving between languages fast on a busy day when there are 100 different things to do by somebody scribbling in a book. So when you hear the name that's come down to us, the first thing that comes to mind is, this isn't an American name. This is a problem of transliteration.
The Japanese have developed phonetic alphabets to help transcode English and other languages. The characters are not words, as in Japanese, but represent particular sounds. It is not precise.
In order to get the sergeant's name down, what the Japanese sergeant would have done would have been to write his name in a Japanese syllabary, an alphabet, but we call it a syllabary, because it's a way of transliterating English into Japanese.
This system of transliteration is far from perfect, as Japanese sounds don't appear in English, and English sounds have no Japanese equivalent. The name may not be Coldy Bymore, but something that sounds a bit like it.
If you think back to that moment when he wrote it down, it sounds something like Goru di Baimor, or maybe Bimoru, and actually then transcribing back, because it went both ways. So maybe this is Goldie Beamer, maybe this is Cody, maybe this is Biltmore. God knows. When the American sergeant said, "Oh, my name's Goldie Beamer," the Japanese would say Goru di Bimaru, and then put it into these characters, which then come back to us in a scrambled form.
So was there a 7th Cavalry Sergeant in Tokyo on the 18th of January 1946 with a name similar to Coldy Bymore? Unfortunately, the scrap records of lowly sergeants have been routinely destroyed. The true name of the sergeant can never be found. But even so, many believe the Honjo Masamune could still turn up. In the years since the war, Americans began to understand the prestige and value of fine Japanese swords properly. President Truman was given a 650-year-old sword in a 350-year-old silk wrapping as a war souvenir. The Allied occupation of Japan continued until 1952, and the influx of swords to America after the Second World War was like a tsunami. For the handful of knowledgeable sword enthusiasts who recognized the characteristics which made a blade great, there was the opportunity to make a lot of money.
I could quite easily buy swords one day for £15 and sell them the next day for £300 or something, which is incredible sort of stuff.
Dealers discovered that hidden in the stream of confiscated weapons, there were historically important swords now scattered all over the US.
In America has still got thousands of swords stashed away in attics, box rooms, garages, which was brought back as trophies and are merely regarded as, oh, Grandad's old sword.
Could the Honjo Masamune be among Grandad's old swords? Since World War II, There have been thousands of ads placed in newspapers all over the US offering to buy Japanese swords. These were the days when a fine collection could still be acquired very cheaply.
In America, especially over the 1970s and 80s, I've heard it termed as the gold rush over there, and people were making fortunes buying, selling swords, and mostly selling them back to Japan.
As this market developed, some important art swords did occasionally turn up. Avid collector Clive Sinclair came by a sword when it surfaced in just this way. Wonderfully preserved, it was made especially for the Shogun's chief test cutter.
It turned up in an antique fair, swapped hands for £400. Within half an hour, it's got up to £1,500. And I paid £10,000 for it. And I've spent another £3,000 on it since then. And it's been exhibited in Japan. It's a very good sword.
Could this one day happen to the Honjo Masamune? If it did emerge from someone's attic, how could it be recognized? There is a telltale way of knowing. 700 years ago, when Masamune plunged the hot blade into cold water, he gave birth to a razor-sharp weapon. But he also gave the Honjo Masamune a unique signature.
If a sword turned up that was claimed to be the Honjo Masamune, because it was a national treasure, prior to the war there were very, very accurate drawings made of its shape, the patterning of the hardened edge, which you could use to compare a sword with, to say, yes, it's the same, or no, it isn't.
For centuries, it was customary for an artist to meticulously draw the unique pattern on the edge of a fine sword, the hamon. When in 1939 the Japanese declared the Honjo Masamune a national treasure, such fine detailed drawings of the hamon were made. If the Honjo Masamune ever appeared at an antiques fair or auction, there could be no mistake. Its fingerprints have been taken.
At this point, perhaps the best way of understanding the meaning of that sword is as an artistic object. So it's made by a famous maker, and it has fabulous provenance. If you go to an auction house today, you need something with provenance. You need to know which hands it's passed through.
But any lucky finder in the US would face a catch-22. For a collector to be certain, for its identity to be official, the Honjo Masamune would have to be sent to Japan for shinsa, a rigorous examination by Japanese experts.
The problem with that is, if you live in America and you own this sword and you send it to Japan for shinsa, they won't allow it to be exported again. So you've actually got to give it back to Japan, basically, to get it verified.
So, if anyone did find it, they would have every incentive to keep it secret, for fear of losing it. Whatever the case, the whereabouts of the Honjo Masamune remains a complete mystery to this day. Anyone trying to trace it faces huge obstacles. The few clues there are sparse. The identity of the elusive cavalry sergeant is still a mystery. Precisely what happened that day at the Majiro police station may never be known. If only we had the paperwork, a signature, the Honjo Masamune might yet be found. It's one of the ironies of this story that the Honjo Masamune needn't have been handed in at all. If the Tokugawas had only waited just a few months until the law was changed, they could have kept it.
Maybe even 6 months later, it would have been protected. It would still be there. It would probably be somewhere deep in a vault in the Tokyo National Museum. The Honjo Masamune would have become, again, firmly, finally, a national treasure, a national property put on show for the people of the new nation not as a weapon, as a work of art.
There is another irony. Because it is lost, the Honjo Masamune has been transformed from a historical artifact to a thing of legend.
Maybe the most important fact about this sword is that it's lost. A thing that no longer is there, or a thing that you've never seen, is much more powerful than one that you have close at hand.
The legend will only ever grow stronger until more evidence can establish where it is or whether it has been destroyed.
Unless we see its corpse or something, we'll never know, will we? I mean, unless we see its broken tang or something, we'll never know.
Anyone with a love of Japanese swords can never give up hope.
I still somehow feel that it still does exist, possibly unrecognised, somewhere.
Things usually turn up when somebody dies, and heirs go in and discover objects. It could still turn up. If it did, it would be a media spectacle.
It would be wonderful if somebody could find that sword.
While a treasure such as the Honjo Masamune remains lost, stories will be told of its possible location, and people will dream of it, hunt for it. The lost sword of the samurai.
In Japan, there is a legend of a great buried treasure.
You would be talking about tens of millions of dollars worth of gold coins in today's money.
It is the supposed fortune of a mighty warlord, buried deep in the mountains.
It's in a bit of Japan that's pretty much ignored.
This warlord, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, was the last of his kind, the last shogun of Japan.
The shogunate stayed for 250 years, 15 generations.
The key to his riches lay with a faithful servant who carried his secret to the grave.
He was just rounded up suddenly and decapitated.
Two rival families are locked in a race to find this fabulous treasure.
It was such an important part of Japan's history. If only you could dig up some bit from the time.
Their quest would bridge generations, lasting more than a century, and capture the imagination of a country.
This just kind of fed into people's desire to believe in some kind of fantasy.
This is the story of an extraordinary treasure hunt, a bitter rivalry, and a fortune beyond imagination. The lost treasure of the last shogun. At the turn of the 21st century, an elderly man spent his last days digging deep in the mountains of central Japan. He was looking for gold.
Japan is very mountainous, so there's huge numbers of areas where potentially somebody could have gone and sequestered some stuff.
His name was Mizuno Tomeyuki. The fortune he sought was a treasure that was lost almost 140 years previously.
According to the most popular version of the legends, there were originally over 4 or 5 million coins total. So you would be talking about tens of millions of dollars worth of gold coins in today's money.
Mizuno Tomeyuki had spent his entire life on a quest for this vast hoard of coins and felt he was on the verge of an extraordinary breakthrough.
We, Mizuno, can dig for 3, 4, 5, even 100 generations, because warriors from the samurai days entrusted this to us. If we hadn't been entrusted with this, it would be just some treasure hunt, and I would have stopped long ago. I'm not that stupid.
Where did all this money come from, and why did it mysteriously vanish? The roots of the legend stretch back to a time of great upheaval. 1866. For 263 years, one family, the House of Tokugawa, held the reins of power. They seized the country in a violent insurrection, then brought centuries of peace to this wild land.
Historically, it's been very hard to hold the country together. It always falls apart. Civil wars repeatedly take place. If you imagine Switzerland, where you have mountain, valley, torrent, another mountain, another torrent, and imagine that continuing from Stockholm to Naples. That's what Japan is.
So far, there had been 15 generations of Tokugawa rulers, but they were not emperors. They were shoguns.
Shogun literally means barbarian subduing generalissimo. And it's a title that is given to someone officially by the emperor who lives in Kyoto.
The latest of this long line was Tokugawa Yoshinobu. In theory, he was a military commander who served at the emperor's pleasure. In practice, he ruled supreme, and all bowed to him. From his ancestral home at Edo Castle, the shogun governed with the aid of a vast aristocratic class, the samurai. It was an ancient feudal system that had endured for centuries.
The shogunal system was created early in the 17th century, and the first shogun was deified. That made it very difficult ever to change anything that he had set in place.
From his exalted position, the shogun not only held the reins of power, but wealth beyond imagination. At his court, a group of his most loyal and trusted samurai were given the task of administering his vast fortune. One of them was a man named Oguri Tadamasa.
Oguri Tadamasa is what's called a bannerman. He's one of about 5,000 mid-ranking samurai who are loyal to the Tokugawa shogunate and really function as mid-level bureaucrats in the regime.
He was well-educated bureaucrat, come from a decent family. When he was young, people very quickly realised he had both mastered the military skills but also kind of literature and poetry and things like that, which was what you needed in order to have legitimacy in the top levels of the Japanese bureaucracy.
Oguri reached an exalted position as the shogun's commissioner of finance. His role was to account for the huge sums paid to the shogun in taxation. Every warlord owed the shogun an annual tribute, and all that wealth passed through Oguri's hands.
Essentially, he was the accountant for the Tokugawa regime itself, and this was a very important position because the Tokugawa shogunate needed money not only to pay all of its samurai, but to manage any reforms that they wanted to pursue.
Oguri knew that reforms were badly needed. Life in Japan had barely changed in 200 years. Yet beyond her shores, the world was in the throes of the Industrial Revolution. Oguri was one of the few Japanese who had been abroad and seen the benefits this brought to Western nations. He developed grand plans to modernize his deeply traditional society.
Oguri was just stunned by how far behind Japan was in terms of modern infrastructure. He wanted to create a postal system, he wanted to create a shipyard to kind of imitate what the West had. So he was one of the most vocal supporters of Westernization, if you will.
But the shogun was not interested in change. And while he continued to live in splendor, the rest of Japan struggled in dire poverty.
95% of people, they were living in little miserable huts in the countryside as they had done for 1,000 years. They never left their village. Life was hard and miserable and cold in winter and hot in summer, and they died young.
This imbalance bred a wave of resentment that slowly spread through the country. A group of disaffected warlords, banished to the farthest corners of Japan, began to plot against the shogun.
One starts to get already feelings that the shogunate's outlasted its usefulness, and there comes a movement to return power to the emperor.
The conspirators were deeply loyal to the 16-year-old Emperor Meiji. In 1868, they hatch a plot to restore him to power and grab the wealth of the shogun for themselves. Encouraged by his growing band of supporters, Meiji orders the shogun to resign and sends his troops to remove him. The response from the shogun is not what anyone expected.
When the shogunate collapses, it's actually quite startling. The shogun kind of like retires. He doesn't kill himself, he doesn't set the city on fire, he just goes off and lives in the country the rest of his life.
The shogun was gone. Without their master's protection, all of the Tokugawa retainers were in great danger. None more so than Oguri Tadamasa, the man in charge of the shogun's treasury. Oguri knew that the Meiji forces would be coming for him. They desperately wanted the shogun's vast wealth, and he would be tortured and killed in their efforts to find it. So he too fled the castle. But far from saving his own life, Oguri put himself at even greater risk. His flight sparked a rumor that would make him imperial enemy number one.
When Oguri was moving out, he had a lot of luggage with him. Some of those boxes were coin boxes, of course. So people thought that there must be coins in there.
Oguri escaped just in time.
When the emperor's forces arrive in Edo Castle, they immediately go into the treasuries and find that there are no coins there at all.
The treasuries were empty. The vast wealth of the shogun had vanished.
The Meiji forces just can't believe that there's no money at all. Someone must have the money somewhere. In one of the famous stories, they ask one of the Tokugawa samurai, "Where's all the money?" He tells them, "I don't know, but you should ask Oguri, the commissioner of finance."
But where was Oguri? And where could he have hidden such a large cache of money?
It came to their attention that Oguri had disappeared. There were also some rumours at the time from witnesses who claimed to have seen a man getting off of a boat in Gunma Prefecture, laden, and going off and potentially hiding something.
Gunma Prefecture was Oguri's ancestral home. It was a wild region, about 100 miles inland from Edo.
Gunma is a fairly high area with many mountainous plateaus. It's wild, it's far from everywhere.
It's very rural. It's in a bit of Japan that's pretty much ignored.
In other words, it was the ideal location to conceal a fortune. Oguri was now hiding here, in a Buddhist temple on the slopes of a dormant volcano, Mount Akagi. The rumor that he had millions of coins in his possession made him a marked man. A matter of days after his arrival, people came to rob him.
A group of about 10 gangsters or so whip up a mob of up to 700 people, and they essentially send a messenger to Oguri telling him to hand over all of the money that he has. Oguri sends a messenger with about 50 coins and says, "Look, this is really all I have." They don't believe him, and this mob attacks the temple where Oguri is staying. and Oguri and his retainers rout the mob and kill many of the gangsters.
Oguri and a small band of servants survive this attack in a stunning display of martial skill. But it was a hollow victory. Emperor Meiji now saw him as a serious threat to the new regime. Anyone with so much might and so much money had to be eliminated.
Because Oguri demonstrated that he has some kind of military expertise, and he has retainers with him and also village men with him who know how to fight, it is thought by the Meiji forces that perhaps Oguri is plotting to launch a counterattack.
A detachment of the emperor's best samurai are sent to kill Oguri. He was declared an outlaw on the spot and summarily sentenced to death.
But because Oguri was just rounded up suddenly and accused of being a criminal, he was just decapitated.
The next day, Oguri's family and the last of his loyal followers are rounded up too. They are also executed. The only ones who knew the treasure's whereabouts were dead. Yet from the ashes of Oguri's household, the legend of the lost treasure of the last Shogun was born. With the restoration of the emperor, Japan entered a brave new world.
After the Meiji Emperor took over, Japan changed dramatically, incredibly quickly. It was full-on modernization.
The feudal system was abolished. Old Edo was renamed Tokyo, and Japan leaped into the white heat of the Industrial Revolution. The world of the Shogun was consigned to history.
When the Meiji regime came to power, they had to villainize the previous regime. So the Tokugawa was turned into a kind of dark, primitive, unprogressive, feudal time.
Within a few short years, Oguri Tadamasa was all but forgotten. Though ironically his ideas about shipyards, postal systems, and other newfangled technology were adopted wholesale. But one man could not let go of the past. His name was Nakajima Kurando. He would be the first in a long line of treasure hunters.
Nakajima Kurando supposedly worked within the Commission of Finance as a very low-ranking bureaucrat.
This petty bureaucrat claimed he was a noble samurai and one of Oguri Tadamasa's most loyal retainers. Somehow, he escaped death at the hands of the emperor's men, and he knew about the existence of the hidden gold. Sometime in the late 1870s, he began to search for it. He believed it was somewhere in the wild terrain of Mount Akagi, where his master Oguri had died several years earlier. He enlisted an American railwayman, one of thousands of foreigners trying to make their fortune in the new Japan. The American had two things that Nakajima needed: money to fund an expedition, and dynamite to blast into the hard rock of the mountain.
Nakajima buys land and says to this American, "Here, I found this gold coin and there's more of it up there. You can go digging in there and find it."
The pair dug together for months. However, no gold was found. Believing he had been duped, the American sued Nakajima. And Nakajima was sentenced to 2 years in prison for fraud. After his release, this once proud samurai was destitute. He was left homeless on the streets of Tokyo and had to seek shelter with some old family friends, the Mizunos. During his stay in the Mizuno house, Nakajima quickly made an impression with several members of the family, especially Mrs. Mizuno and her oldest son, Tomoyoshi.
Mizuno Tomoyoshi was a young man. He remembers Nakajima essentially having an illicit relationship with his mother after his father died.
For some months, Nakajima continued as a live-in lover for Mrs. Mizuno. In that time, he also became an inspiration to her son. Tomoyoshi came to regard him as a stepfather. Yet despite their close relationship, Nakajima kept the legend of the gold a closely guarded secret. Then without warning, Nakajima strangely vanished. Tomoyoshi took the disappearance particularly hard. He assumed he would never again hear from the man he once called his dad. He was wrong. A decade after he went missing, Nakajima Kurando broke his silence.
One day, after not seeing Nakajima for some 10 years, a letter suddenly arrives.
In the letter, Nakajima explains that he is dying. He begs Tomoyoshi's forgiveness and pleads for his adopted son to come to see him one last time. He had to tell Tomoyoshi a secret about the lost treasure of the last Shogun.
So Mizuno Tomoyoshi visits Nakajima as he's sick and dying, and is essentially given a bunch of documents and told to go find the gold.
When they met, Nakajima revealed that in all his years away, he had been desperately searching for the hidden treasure. To Tomoyoshi's utter amazement, Nakajima asked him to continue the quest and gave him all of his research.
It doesn't have a map and it doesn't say the treasure is here, but it supposedly has all these puzzles that'll help him find the treasure.
Just days after this encounter, Nakajima died. Tomoyoshi was shocked at the secret life of his stepfather. To him, the whole idea of the quest seemed ludicrous. Mount Akagi is 6,000 feet high and covers hundreds of square miles. The gold could be anywhere, and Nakajima's documents offered no concrete information. But around the turn of the 20th century, his life took a dramatic turn.
It seems that the real tipping point for Mizuno was when his wife suddenly died of pneumonia.
In the wake of this devastating loss, Tomoyoshi fell back on the legacy of the lost treasure and threw himself into Nakajima's cryptic research.
He essentially has an emotional crisis, sells his business, sells his house, and moves out to Mount Akagi in Gunma Prefecture to begin buying land and looking for the treasure.
Tomoyoshi made a solemn vow to carry on Nakajima's quest for the lost treasure of the Shogun. It wasn't long before he made a breakthrough in deciphering some of the arcane riddles, and that, in turn, led to his first real discovery.
He claims to have found a small gold statue. He also claims to have these copper plates that have markings on them and a little map.
Tomoyoshi's entire life was now dedicated to the search for gold.
He goes around and tells people that he has these things in order to get money to continue digging for the gold in Mount Akagi.
For almost 40 years, he dug and dug and dug. He even found a new wife who agreed to help him in his search and started a family. All the while, with no job to speak of, Tomoyoshi burned through the savings he built up from his previous life.
When he starts off, he's rather wealthy. He was a real estate guy in Tokyo, and he had a lot of money with him when he first moved out there, but he gradually ran out of money.
The quest for the treasure bankrupted Tomoyoshi. But whatever troubles he had, he ignored them. He was obsessed with only one thing: finding the Shogun's gold. Yet no matter how deep he went, no matter how carefully he scrutinized the clues in his growing pile of documents, he found nothing. In 1926, Mizuno Tomoyoshi died, heartbroken and penniless. Tomoyoshi's son, Mizuno Aizaburo, was a policeman who wanted nothing to do with buried treasure. But Aizaburo's mother was desperate to continue the search. She begged Aizaburo to carry on the family quest.
After Tomoyoshi dies, Tomoyoshi's wife tells her son, look, your father felt that you were the one who really should be digging for treasure. And so she gives Aizaburo all of the documents that Tomoyoshi had.
Aizaburo felt he had no choice but to honor his father's wishes. He quit his job and moved to Mount Akagi. The torch had passed to a new generation.
In a way, this tradition of treasure hunting has become associated with the Mizuno family, so they're the experts, and they have this lineage as well.
Aizaburo had inherited all of Nakajima Kurando's documents, and still more research that his father had done in 40 years of searching. Still, no gold had yet been found, and the vast bulk of Mount Akagi remained unexplored. Where to start?
He does continue, in some part, digging some of the tunnels that his father had started, but through his own research, he also starts digging other tunnels around Mount Akagi.
After just a few months of digging, some valuable new clues were uncovered.
And they do find this kind of stone tortoise with strange writing on it, and they see that as a sign that this is a clue that will lead us closer to the treasure.
Aizaburo's search continued into the 1930s, but as he dug on, Japan was changing around him. The country harbored vast imperial ambitions, and it was marching steadily towards war. At this time, there was a newfound interest in Oguri Tadamasa, the last shogun's most fervent modernizer, and the source of the shogun's treasure legend.
In the late 1920s and early 1930s, there's an Oguri boom. He really becomes a kind of national hero, a supporter of the Japanese Navy, and there are lots of books and biographies written about him.
One man decided to use Oguri's newly restored good name for his own ends, to seek out the shogun's missing fortune. He was called Kawahara Hidemori. Now the Mizunos had a rival, and the race to find the treasure was heating up.
Kawahara Hidemori decides to claim that he is the grandson of an illicit relationship between Oguri and some mistress.
As Oguri's illegitimate grandson, Kawahara believed only he had the right to search for the shogun's treasure. He had been researching likely burial sites for years. But before he could begin his dig, he needed to raise a substantial amount of money. In 1934, he launched a publicity drive. Taking advantage of the nationalist sentiment of the day, Kawahara arranged a press conference at the Buddhist temple where the severed head of Oguri Tadamasa was supposedly buried.
He becomes very popular in the 1930s among treasure hunters. He shows up with a kimono with the Oguri family crest on it and essentially says that he's here to, help find the treasure.
Before a small crowd at the temple, Kawahara promised to completely refurbish it in Oguri's memory and donate the rest of the money to the nation, minus his own cut for expenses, of course. But then the chief monk of the temple unexpectedly intervened. He had been watching Kawahara's performance and didn't believe a word. He stepped in front of the crowd himself to denounce Kawahara as a fraud. In the monk's opinion, Kawahara was definitely not Oguri's grandson, and Oguri himself would not have approved of this whole charade. Still, many members of the Japanese public bought into his story and gave money. Kawahara also attracted one major sponsor, a shady pachinko gambling boss. Awash with money, Kawahara began his own dig for the treasure. Unlike the Mizuno family, he claimed the gold was not on Mount Akagi, but in a small village to the southwest of Tokyo. Like his rivals, Kawahara dug for many fruitless years. Nothing stopped his relentless quest or the flow of money from well-wishers. Not even the Second World War. Indeed, his promise to donate any gold he found to the Japanese nation was a source of hope in those turbulent years.
Throughout the war and even into the 1950s, Kawahara continues to dig in all sorts of places south of Tokyo and earns a lot of money from people who he convinces that this story is true.
By the early 1960s, Kawahara had been searching for almost 30 years. Now Japan was undergoing a massive economic revival, and Kawahara's gambling boss patron was a rich man. His change in fortunes helped take the expedition to a new level.
In this period, Japan performs an economic miracle. It's absolutely incredible. And the middle class expands, and everybody seems to be doing incredibly well out of this economic nationalism.
Unlike the Mizunos, struggling in poverty, Kawahara could afford to delve far underground. He dug a deep mine with an electric lift and the latest groundwater pumps to keep the site dry. He also had 13 workers to help him excavate. With these new resources, he raced ahead in the contest to uncover the gold. He dug down 250 feet to the supposed location of the great chests of coins. But, despite his well-financed operation, Kawahara Hidemori, the alleged illegitimate grandson of Oguri, was unable to find any treasure. In 1967, he died, but still, the legend of the treasure lived on.
People were aware of this idea of the Tokugawa treasure. In the 1970s, the Yomiuri newspaper ran a massive series on this idea of hidden treasure. Every single article said, well, this is the legend and nothing's been found. This is the legend, but nothing's been found. These people were searching and they didn't find anything. But this went on and on and on for 16 separate articles.
Rumors of buried treasure rumbled on for decades after Kawahara's death, and the legend became part of Japanese popular culture. But it was not until the 1990s that another serious effort was made to find it. This time, it was the Mizunos, the rival treasure-hunting family, that would come closer than ever to unlocking the mystery of the Shogun's lost fortune. 2 generations of the family, Tomoyoshi and his son Aizaburo, had been digging on the slopes of Mount Akagi for nearly a century. Now a 3rd generation of Mizuno treasure hunters was about to enter the game. Mizuno Tomoyuki, the son of Aizaburo. Like his father and his grandfather before him, he was highly skeptical of the legend.
Initially, he did not want any part of the treasure hunting. He thought it was a total sham. He didn't believe that the Tokugawa shogunate would have buried gold coins, and basically he went off on his own in Tokyo and worked in a variety of jobs.
But Tomoyuki could not resist the pull of the quest that his family had been pursuing since the late 19th century. It was not simply a question of finding the money. It was a matter of family honor.
There's the weight of carrying on the family tradition, which is established in Japanese culture and history and society. This idea of you trying very, very hard until the end, this idea of ganbaru, which means to work hard, you will persevere through whatever comes along and you will ultimately succeed in the end. This is very much instilled in people in Japan at a very, very early age.
Tomoyuki decided that he must follow in the footsteps of his forebears and give up his day job in Tokyo. He swore to dedicate his life to the completion of this epic quest.
Was just attracted by the legacy of his father and his grandfather. And he also became convinced because of all these old documents that his grandfather had from the 19th century. So he began doing research on his own and began digging a whole separate series of tunnels separate from his father and grandfather.
Tomoyuki's quest coincided with a new time of upheaval in Japan. The economy had collapsed, and a national mood of depression set in. The Japanese media began casting around for a hero.
The 1990s is called the Lost Decade.
Japan's lost decade is about economic stagnation. One should remember that that stagnation came after a protracted period of enormous growth, which could not have been maintained forever.
Not only was there economic crisis, but there was political scandal, a natural disaster, a terrorist attack in Tokyo. And this just kind of fed into people's desire to believe in some kind of fantasy.
And what better fantasy than the legendary lost treasure of the Shogun? One enterprising television network called Mizuno Tomoyuki to see if he wanted to be on TV.
In the early 1990s, there was a Japanese entertainment show appropriately called Gimme a Break.
It follows a pattern of Japanese television shows that you still get today. It'll have a number of celebrities interviewing other celebrities, music, animation, sketches, all put together in a 2-hour format.
A Japanese copywriter who grew up in Gunma was familiar with the legend, and he decided to produce a show about the treasure hunting in Mount Akagi.
In their call to Tomoyuki, the producers explained they wanted to cast him and his family as modern-day heroes, men determined to succeed in the face of insurmountable odds. Men who embodied the noble idea of ganbaru.
It's entirely sensible for them to get in contact with the Mizunos and try and use their expertise, but also to legitimise what they're doing. They're not just rushing off into Gunma Prefecture with a load of cranes and digging holes. They've got the guy, and he's the person who's going to make sure we do this properly.
It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. The producers of Gimme a Break got a never-ending real-life soap opera to inspire the nation. In return, Tomoyuki received more resources than he could ever dream of. After years in the wilderness, the Mizunos were back, with the best chance they would ever have of striking gold.
The Mizuno, they've been searching for 120 years and haven't found anything. If a TV producer says to you, we're going to give you 12 cranes and loads of digging equipment, would you like to get on board? I mean, for him, this is a huge boon, because he doesn't have to do it on his own.
The whole nation seemed to be willing Tomoyuki on, and with his help, the TV company found gold, ratings gold.
There would be these huge backhoes and cranes that would dig this enormous pit, almost the size of a rock quarry. And they would find these horizontal tunnels, and so they would go digging in there, and then some earth would fall in a funny way, and they would say, aha, someone must have buried something there. They would find a few bottles, which was an indication that perhaps Oguri's French connections had wine out here and dropped a bottle long ago.
Altogether, the network revisited the Mount Akagi treasure site 10 times in the 1990s, each time with a more elaborate and expensive effort to find the hidden treasure.
When they find lots and lots of tunnels, what they're finding are the tunnels that were dug in the 1930s in order to find the treasure. But that is conveniently left out of the story because it's not very exciting.
This was no longer about logic, it was about magic. Fueled by growing viewer numbers, the search soon became completely detached from reality.
When more money started coming in to produce the show, they hired a few American psychics to come over. They flew over Mount Akagi in a helicopter to try to feel the psychic power of where the treasure would be buried. They also hired an esoteric Buddhist monk to pray to the ancestors to find where the treasure was. And each episode ended with a cliffhanger that, you know, something had just been found. So that would get people to watch the next time.
In the final installment, in 1999, the dig reached fever pitch. By now, the Mizuno excavation works resembled something like an open-cast mine. It descended fully 200 feet below the surface of the mountain. A network of tunnels, dug over generations by the Mizunos, went down even further still. In one final dramatic push, a huge industrial mining drill was brought in to dig still further, hoping to find a hidden cavern containing the gold. But the media frenzy had overwhelmed Tomoyuki. He came to believe the TV company did not care about the treasure itself. All they wanted was a grand spectacle to please their audience.
It seems that in the later episodes, Mizuno felt that they were going on the wrong track. And he almost felt that there was a rivalry between this team and his own search. And he eventually dropped out of the project altogether.
The TV audience soon began to dwindle, and the show was eventually cancelled. Tomoyuki was alone once more, and still, he pressed on with his dig.
There was always some aspect, something that made them feel like we're almost 90% there. And so he couldn't give up.
Meanwhile, the Mizuno's rivals for the treasure, the Kawahara family, had been laboring away 140 miles to the south, largely under the radar since the death of Kawahara Hidemori in 1967. The quest to find the lost treasure had passed from old Hidemori to his son, Kawahara Jiro. In his early digs, Jiro made a number of discoveries, which he claimed were clear evidence that the gold itself was only a few meters further down.
He claims to have found little objects here and there, and those objects he gives as proof that he's closer to the treasure legend, and of course that makes it easier for him to convince people to give him money.
Among the objects he found were human bones and other Tokugawa-era artifacts, pointing towards the treasure's location. In the year 2000, Jiro took a leaf from his father's book and launched a publicity drive. Just like his father, the thing he wanted was money. The press descended on the same location where his father had appeared almost 70 years before. There, they witnessed Kawahara unveiling a bronze sword and a golden coin, dating from the time of the Tokugawa shogunate. But however much Jiro insisted his artifacts were genuine, the public was now quite skeptical of the whole story.
When experts look at the objects, they find out that essentially these are objects that he bought at a local antique store.
Jiro's claim to be on the verge of finding the treasure was widely denounced, and he seemed to have little hard evidence to back his story up. The Kawahara family's hunt for the treasure was over. The latest generation, Jiro's son, has abandoned the quest completely.
The youngest member of the family wants absolutely nothing to do with his father's search for buried treasure and is actually quite embarrassed by it.
But what of Mizuno Tomoyuki, the unlikely star of Gimme a Break? In 2006, another filmmaker caught up with him. These are some of the extraordinary images he captured. Now a wizened old man dying of cancer, the proud treasure hunter felt he had been cursed by 2 generations of his family. He could not give up his quest, ever.
But that's the star I've been born under with this family. I have this sense of responsibility that I have to do this. That's why I do it. Is there anyone else who has this kind of responsibility? If so, I'd like to meet them. Is there anyone else in Japan who has been entrusted by the samurai of the past?
Someone asked him once, what would you do if you found the treasure? And he said, I would kick it really hard because my family struggled and lost a lot of money and energy in finding this. But he just felt that it was his destiny, his fate, to find this treasure. A fate that no one else but he and his family would be able to fulfill.
After almost 140 years of searching, no one has yet found any gold. So does the treasure really exist? Or was the legend just that?
There has been a lot of stories about the shogunate, the kind of shogunate that wouldn't die. It was such an important part of Japan's history. There's a kind of romantic feeling we don't want it to go away. Only you could dig up some bit from the time.
Despite all of the research done down the years by the Mizuno family, a more objective examination of the facts show that, in all likelihood, there was no money buried in the first place.
There's absolutely no evidence and no possibility that there was buried treasure anywhere.
This is because, in Japan, during the shogunate, gold coins were not used as a measure of wealth.
It's a sort of a Western notion that you have a kind of a jewel tower in which you put all these rich things, and as long as they're in there, you're rich. But for Japan, you're simply having gold sitting in a tower was not of a great deal of use to anyone.
Instead, the great lords of the era counted their riches using a different material: rice.
The standard unit of exchange was rice. And rice is a wonderful unit of exchange because if you get hungry, you can eat it, but also it can be broken up into any sizes. Also, it lasts for quite a long time. And the principal unit of rice was what they call a koku. And a koku, it's enough to sustain an adult for a year.
A junior samurai might earn 100 koku a year. The higher up the social scale he was, the more koku he would be entitled to as tribute from the farmers on his land. The leading lords, such as the shogun himself, would have each claimed more than 1 million koku annually. In fact, the entire class structure of Japan during the shogunate was built around the growing and storage of rice. This was helpful for feeding armies. But when it came to acquiring desirable goods like silk, pottery, or weapons, rice was useless.
The samurai class are paid in rice yield. The merchants operate in coin. You can't buy things with rice, so that the merchants change rice into coin, and they take a rake off, and over time, the amount of coin you get for your rice goes down. The samurai class are increasingly impoverished.
In time, even the shogun himself found his vast stockpiles of rice were worth barely a handful of gold coins. So when the revolution came, he could not afford to defend himself.
One of the reasons why the Tokugawa regime falls is because it doesn't have cash to pay its allies for continued military support. If they had any money at all, the Tokugawa shogunate would have been using it to fund their defense against their warlords.
So the question then remains, if there was no gold, why would anyone spend so much time and effort to try and find a treasure that never really existed?
I think they really believed in this legacy Especially Mizuno Tomoyuki felt that this was just the destiny of his family, that there was too much in terms of 100-year-old documents to really just give it up.
Regardless of how much Mizuno Tomoyuki believed in the legend, he could not convince his children that the gold really existed. He would be the last in his family's long line of treasure hunters.
He has 3 adult children. None of them have expressed any interest at all in continuing this Mizuno family legacy of searching for the treasure.
Tomoyuki was utterly alone in his quest. But even though he had no one to help him, he continued to dig until his very last days. In 2010, Mizuno Tomoyuki died. The search for the lost treasure of the last Shogun died with him.